It started with a noise. Not a loud one. Not at first. Just the soft crinkle of paper on my mailbox. But even that sound had weight. The kind of ominous quiet you hear right before a storm hits. I opened the front door, and there it was. Glitter practically falling off the envelope, reflecting sunlight like some kind of cursed jewel. My name was written across it in gold ink, the handwriting trying a little too hard to be whimsical. I already knew who it was from. Karen. 8 months pregnant, ego 9 months overdue, and more committed to community control than the actual HOA. I opened it right there on the porch. Inside was a pastel invitation on thick, overly perfumed cardstock. Neighborhood celebration, it said at the top, but in the fine print it was clear. This wasn't just a celebration. It was her baby shower. Or, more accurately, a full-blown block party disguised as one. She had written, "Your presence is appreciated," but underneath that, in parentheses, attendance expected. Expected, like we were all supporting actors in her suburban drama. The list of features read like a carnival flyer: live DJ, food trucks, an inflatable bounce house, a pop-up photo booth, and, wait for it, bounce house spillover into neighboring yards as needed. Spillover? My property was literally labeled as Auxiliary Play Area B. And then the kicker: please ensure all pets are kept indoors to avoid party disruption. I swear I heard my dog Tank growl just reading that. Tank, my retired police K9, wasn't just a dog. He was a guardian, an 85-pound wall of fur and discipline, and he didn't like strangers, especially loud, balloon-carrying sugar-high ones. At first, I laughed, thought maybe this was some joke. But then I started hearing from the neighbors. Karen had gone door to door delivering those glitter bombs, pitching her party like a political campaign, smiling too wide, rubbing her belly like a magical badge of authority, and dropping phrases like community unity and shared space responsibilities. She didn't ask anyone. She told them. And those who questioned her got the same passive-aggressive reply: "It's for the baby," as if that made her the suburban messiah. I hadn't even RSVP'd before she sent her cousin, some teenage kid with a man bun and a clipboard, to measure my driveway for bounce house anchoring options. I asked him if he had permission. He said, "Karen said you'd be cool with it." Karen said. That's when I knew. I wasn't dealing with a neighbor anymore. I was dealing with a self-appointed suburban dictator, armed with a fetus and a Pinterest board. I tried to be civil. I walked over the next morning, caught her in the front yard, arranging flamingo lawn ornaments and stringing up pink banners. I asked if maybe she could move the bounce house elsewhere, or at least keep it off my lawn. She looked at me like I had just asked her to cancel Christmas. "Oh," she said, "I assumed you'd want to be involved. This is a community event after all. Besides, the kids will be having fun. Doesn't your dog get anxious around loud music? Maybe he'd be more comfortable inside anyway." I told her Tank isn't the one who's uncomfortable with loud noises. People are uncomfortable when he gets uncomfortable. Her smile didn't falter, just that same tight, smug stretch across her face. "Well," she said, "maybe he'll learn to adjust. We all have to adapt when there's a baby on the way." The very next day, things got weirder. I came home from work to find folding chairs lined up along the edge of my yard. Bright pink ones, with name tags. One of them had a sign taped to it that said, "VIP Mom-to-be view." It was on my property, my actual lawn. I stood there, staring at it like I was seeing things. Tank was already at the window, ears perked, watching like he knew something was off. I walked over to the nearest chair, yanked the sign off, and just as I was pulling the stake out of my grass, I heard Karen's voice from across the street. "Oh, you found your spot," she chirped. "I figured you'd want a good view of the gift opening. You know, since you'll be hosting half the fun." Hosting? I said, "Karen, this is my property. You didn't even ask." Her face dropped the smile for half a second, then reloaded it with fake sweetness. "Well, we are neighbors," she said. "It's not like I'm a stranger, and the HOA has approved everything. It's all official." She waved a folded piece of paper like it was a royal decree. That night, I found that same piece of paper taped to my door. It had an HOA letterhead at the top, but not the actual logo. It looked like someone had typed HOA into Google, downloaded the first image they found, and pasted it into a Word document. The letter was full of made-up terms. Community Unification Clause. Property Integration for Event Harmony. My favorite part? It was signed, Karen M., Acting HOA President, Maternity Interim Role. That's not a thing. There's no maternity interim role in any HOA. I knew that. The real HOA president is a retired lawyer named Dave, and he doesn't even use email. I called him. He hadn't approved anything. Hadn't even heard about a block party. "Karen," he said over the phone. "She's not even on the board. What the hell is she doing now?" So there it was. Karen had forged a fake HOA letter to take over the block with her baby shower fantasy. She was trying to turn a personal celebration into a forced community spectacle, one that stomped all over boundaries, ignored consent, and disrespected the one creature on this street who doesn't tolerate chaos. Tank. And the best part, the party hadn't even started yet. I was coming back from a quick trip to the hardware store when I saw the first sign of trouble. Literally. A big, laminated arrow sign with a cartoon baby bottle pointing toward my driveway, staked right into my front yard like it belonged there. Beneath it, in bold pink lettering, Bounce House Entrance. I didn't even have time to process that before I noticed the truck. It was huge, backed halfway across my lawn, and its back door was open, revealing an enormous inflatable rolled up like some sleeping monster. Two guys in matching uniforms were dragging out the bundle and chatting about where the blower unit should go. One of them pointed toward my flower beds. My flower beds. I slammed the truck in park, got out, and immediately asked them what the hell they were doing. One guy blinked at me and said, "Setting up the unicorn, man." Karen said, "You cleared the space." Karen said. Again with the Karen said. That phrase was starting to feel like an evil spell that summoned chaos wherever it landed. I told them to stop, that I hadn't approved anything, and one of them looked genuinely confused. "She gave us a diagram," he said, pulling a folded piece of paper from his back pocket. And sure enough, there it was, a printed map of the neighborhood with my property labeled in big bold letters, Bounce House Spillover Area. There were even little dotted lines showing foot traffic flow through my side gate. I stared at it in disbelief. She had made a whole map, with arrows, zones, labels. Like this was a theme park, and I was some empty plot of land to be redesigned at will. While I was standing there trying to wrap my head around the audacity, the blower roared to life, and suddenly this massive unicorn started rising like some pastel demon. Its inflatable horn twitched upright, its eyes stared blankly ahead, and its tail flopped into my rose bushes. That's when Tank lost it. I didn't even see him come to the door. I just heard the deep, thunderous bark. The kind of bark that turns your blood cold if you don't know him. I turned around and saw him pawing at the front door, pacing back and forth like a soldier waiting for orders. I cracked the door just enough to get his attention and gave him a look. He understood. He always does. That's when Karen showed up. She walked across the street with this exaggerated waddle, one hand on her belly, the other holding a smoothie cup the size of a traffic cone. "Oh, it's looking so good," she squealed. "Isn't it exciting? The unicorn's bigger than I thought, but that just means more fun, right?" I didn't say anything at first, just stared at her like I was waiting for the punchline. She took a long sip of her drink, gave me this smug little shrug and said, "Don't worry, we'll be out of your hair by sunset. The kids are only going to be here a few hours. You can keep the unicorn up overnight if you want. It glows in the dark. I told her once again, clearly and directly, to get her bounce house off my lawn. That it wasn't happening. That Tank was already on edge, and I wasn't going to be responsible for what happened if she kept pushing. She actually rolled her eyes and said, "It's just a dog, he'll deal." Just a dog. She said that about Tank. A dog who's taken down armed suspects, been trained in crowd control, and could sniff out a threat from a mile away. He was retired, sure, but that switch in his brain still worked just fine. I said, "Karen, you've got 5 minutes to move this circus off my property. After that, I'm opening the door." She smirked, totally unfazed, and said, "Do what you have to do." So I did. I stepped back inside and unlatched the front door. Tank didn't bolt. He never does. He walked out with the calm precision of a cop entering a scene. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He just walked straight to the edge of the unicorn and sat down, right in front of it. Staring at the workers, they froze mid-tether. One of them dropped a rope. Karen, standing at the curb, clapped her hands and said, "Oh, come on, he's not going to bite anybody." But the thing is, she didn't sound so confident anymore. Tank let out one long, low growl. It wasn't loud. It was deeper than that. It came from somewhere ancient, the kind of sound that makes people back away without realizing they're doing it. The bounce house guys looked at me like they were asking permission to run. I nodded. They shut off the blower and started deflating the unicorn fast. It collapsed in on itself like a dying balloon animal, the head flopping down dramatically just as Karen stomped up onto my walkway. "You've ruined everything," she snapped. "This was supposed to be a special day, for the baby." I calmly reminded her, for the third time, that her party wasn't my responsibility, and that forcing people to participate under threat of social guilt didn't make her a leader. It made her a problem. She called me a control freak. I pointed at the unicorn carcass lying across my lawn. "Says the woman who mapped my yard without asking," I said. She opened her mouth to fire back, but Tank stood up and took a single step forward. That was enough. She spun on her heels and waddled back across the street, muttering something about calling the real HOA. I stood there for a moment, Tank beside me, both of us watching the unicorn slowly deflate until it was nothing more than wrinkled vinyl on the grass. Peace had been restored, for now. But Karen wasn't the type to lick her wounds and move on. She came back the next day with backup. The DJ arrived first, backing a trailer into her driveway and unloading speakers big enough to be used at a music festival. Then came the tables, the string lights, the makeshift dance floor she had someone install on her front lawn. I watched all of it from my porch, Tank by my side. It was like watching someone rebuild a sandcastle after the tide already told them no. And just as I was about to head back inside, I saw her again. This time marching straight toward me, holding a stack of laminated flyers. "Since your yard's off limits," she said with a fake smile, "I figured I'd at least extend a formal invitation. We'll be starting at noon sharp. Hope you and the dog can stay quiet for a few hours. You know, out of respect." I didn't even answer, just closed the door. But Tank had other plans. The music started early, not noon, 9:30. Bass so loud it shook the windows, kids screaming, someone honking a horn every 10 seconds. I tried to distract Tank with treats, toys, his favorite rope. Nothing worked. The noise was just too much. He started pacing again, breathing hard, barking low and short like he was trying to hold it together. And then, around 11 o'clock, something snapped. A group of teenagers ran through my side yard, cutting across the lawn, one of them even knocking over the little solar lantern I had by the pond. That was it. I opened the door, and this time, Tank didn't wait for instructions. He bolted outside like a furry missile, tearing across the grass and cutting them off mid-run. He didn't bite, didn't lunge. He just stood there, towering, growling, blocking their path like a living wall of warning. The kids froze. One of them dropped their phone. Karen saw what was happening and screamed like he'd just attacked a stroller. She ran out, waving her arms and yelling something about lawsuits and rabies shots and community betrayal. I called Tank back, one sharp whistle, and he returned instantly, tail high, proud, ears forward like he was waiting for a medal. The party didn't stop, but the energy changed. Everyone had seen what happened, and no one, not even Karen, tried to step onto my lawn again. You ever see a party unravel in real time? Not suddenly, not in one big explosive moment, but in slow, humiliating pieces, like watching a cake slide off its stand in agonizing slow motion. That's exactly what happened that afternoon. Karen's grand celebration was already limping along by the time the DJ's speakers gave out. They'd been shaking so hard on the folding table she brought that one of the legs snapped, and when the subwoofer hit the ground, it made this pitiful crunching sound, followed by a long, awkward silence. The music stopped, just flatlined. One of the teenagers yelled, Yo, it's broken!" And that was the beginning of the end. Karen was nowhere in sight at that moment. Last I saw her, she was waddling back to her house to grab more paper lanterns, or maybe her Bluetooth karaoke mic. Meanwhile, the bounce house, which had been re-inflated but placed awkwardly between her driveway and a neighbor's hydrangea bush, was slowly starting to list to one side. The kids kept bouncing unevenly, and with every jump, it leaned a little more. One of the food trucks was running behind schedule, and the one that had shown up was already out of juice boxes, which sent a wave of sugar-deprived tantrums across the tiny guests. The gift table, set out too early and directly in the sun, was starting to melt, literally. Candles, wrapped chocolates, and this one unfortunate unicorn-shaped soap favor were all fusing into a sticky puddle beneath the plastic tablecloth. That's when Karen re-emerged, huffing and puffing and dragging a box full of glittery mason jars she planned to hang from a tree. She stopped dead in her tracks when she saw the DJ packing up his gear. "Where are you going?" she barked. He shrugged and said, "You didn't say we'd be outside this long. My stuff's overheating." She launched into a full-blown meltdown, accusing him of sabotaging her vision and threatening to report this to Yelp. I don't think Yelp takes those kinds of cases, but I wasn't about to explain that to her. Meanwhile, the bounce house gave one last dramatic wobble before the blower hose disconnected entirely. With a sad, drawn-out hiss, it started collapsing while 4 kids were still inside. It was like a pastel cave-in. Screams erupted, parents rushed forward, and in the middle of all of it, Tank stood by my fence, calm and stoic, watching the chaos unfold like a retired general surveying the battlefield. But Karen wasn't done, not by a long shot. She stormed back across the street and marched right up to my door, cheeks flushed and nostrils flaring like a cartoon steam engine. She didn't knock, just shouted, "You! This is your fault. You've poisoned the energy on this block." I opened the door halfway, Tank sitting behind me like a shadow, and said, "What energy?" "The one where you staged a baby shower coup and hijacked people's property." She jabbed a finger in my direction, then pointed to Tank. "You traumatized the children with that monster, and you intimidated the party staff. I'm calling the police." I actually smiled at that. "Good," I said. "Let's get some clarity around here." 15 minutes later, 2 squad cars rolled up, and as if summoned by fate, one of the officers happened to recognize Tank immediately. Turns out he'd worked a couple scenes with him years back. "This your partner?" he asked, crouching to pet him. "He saved my ass in a warehouse bust once." Karen stood a few feet away, arms crossed, trying to look victimized while failing miserably. I calmly explained the situation, how she'd planned a party on private property, forged fake HOA documents, and refused to move when asked. The officer nodded through the whole thing, then turned to Karen and asked the million-dollar question. "Did he give you permission to use his yard?" She blinked. "Well, not directly, but he didn't say no right away. And I'm pregnant." The officer raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, that's not how permission works." It would have ended there. Should have ended there. But Karen had one more card to play. Later that evening, just as the sun started setting and the chaos of her failed event finally simmered down, a new post appeared on the neighborhood's private Facebook group. A long, unhinged essay written by none other than Karen herself. The title: "When Neighbors Become Threats, My Experience with Domestic Hostility." It started with a photo of the bounce house, half deflated and leaning sadly in the background, captioned, "The Scene of the Trauma." What followed was several paragraphs of Karen claiming she had been violently verbally assaulted, that her unborn child had been subjected to stress-inducing canines, and that she had barely escaped a vicious attack orchestrated by a rogue resident with military-grade dog training. I nearly spit out my drink when I got to that part. She actually used the phrase military-grade. The comments section lit up immediately, but not in the way she expected. People started asking very reasonable questions. Didn't you plan this party without any official approval? Why was the bounce house in someone else's yard? Didn't I see you scream at the DJ? One neighbor even posted a gif of a unicorn deflating with the caption, "RIP to the real victim." But the best comment came from a retired teacher down the block who just wrote, "Karen, it's time to sit down and put your feet up, preferably in your own yard." Karen didn't reply to a single comment. Not one. Instead, she deleted the post a few hours later like it never happened. But the damage was done. Everyone had seen it. Everyone had read it. And the next morning, her humiliation showed up in real life in the form of a single priceless moment. The HOA president knocking on my door, clipboard in hand, smiling. He introduced himself, thanked me for my incredible patience, and said, "We've had several reports. I just want to let you know we're opening a formal review into Karen's behavior, and you'll be receiving a written apology from the board." I asked, "So, what happens now?" He chuckled and said, "Let's just say Karen might need to find a new hobby, preferably one that doesn't involve forgery or inflatable livestock." I watched him walk back to his car, Tank at my side, both of us finally starting to feel something I hadn't felt in weeks. Peace. Not because Karen was done. No, she wasn't the type to let go without a final act. But because for the first time since this whole circus started, someone else had seen the madness for what it was. And better yet, they were doing something about it. The next few days were quiet. Unsettlingly quiet. Karen didn't stomp across the street. No more party flyers appeared in mailboxes. No glitter bomb invitations. No screaming about HOA rules she made up 5 minutes ago. Her poodles weren't yapping at every breeze, and for the first time since she moved in, her front yard looked abandoned. The pink flamingos were still there, but tilted like they'd given up on standing proud. A sun-faded "It's a Girl" banner dangled from her porch, barely clinging to one hook, and her car, normally parked diagonally across her driveway like she was daring someone to tow it, hadn't moved in days. You could feel it in the air. The block was holding its breath, waiting. People watered their lawns a little slower, took longer to check their mail, just in case something happened. And then, it did. Late one evening, just as I was bringing Tank in from a walk, I saw the envelope on my doorstep. Thick yellow cardstock, cheap legal template font on the front. My full name spelled out like I'd just been served. And inside, a cease and desist letter from Karen. I didn't even have to read past the first paragraph to know she hadn't paid a real lawyer for this. The wording was a mess. She accused me of willfully endangering the emotional security of a pregnant citizen. knowingly weaponizing a canine of trained intimidation, and unlawful electro-energy perimeter installations. Electro-energy, not even a real phrase. But what really got me was the signature. Not from a law firm, no legal stamp or contact info, just her name, typed in bold italics, with a scanned gavel clip art above it like she Googled legal symbol, and went with the first thing she saw. I stood there on the porch, letter in one hand, Tank's leash in the other, and I just laughed. Not because it was funny, but because this woman was actually trying to rewrite reality. She had humiliated herself, endangered my dog, vandalized my property, impersonated an HOA board member, and now she was trying to make herself the victim in some fantasy courtroom drama where she was the brave whistleblower, and I was the mad fence scientist with a lightning dog. I didn't throw the letter away. No, I scanned it, filed it under Karen Files, and forwarded it to the real HOA president with a quick note that just read, "Thought you'd enjoy this." His response? 4 words, "See you this Friday." Friday arrived like a storm that had been building for weeks. You could feel the tension in the air as people gathered at the community center. I got there early with a flash drive, a folder of printed evidence, and the calm satisfaction of someone who knows he doesn't have to make a case. The case makes itself. The room was packed. Neighbors who hadn't shown up to an HOA meeting in years came out of the woodwork, some carrying folding chairs because the rows were already full. People murmured as they shuffled in. Everyone knew why they were really there. Not for budget discussions, not for tree trimming updates. They came for the show, the reckoning. Then she walked in. Karen, dressed like she was entering a courtroom drama, neck brace, oversized sunglasses, a long black coat that looked like it had been purchased specifically for dramatic exits. Her arm was in a sling, even though no one had seen her wear one until that moment. She walked slowly, limping slightly with a cane that kept clicking against the linoleum floor, like she was tapping out Morse code for "pity me." But nobody was buying it. Not this time. Not after what she pulled. The HOA president started the meeting like usual, reading off the minutes, asking for old business updates, pretending like we weren't all waiting for the fireworks. Then, he cleared his throat and said, "Next item, special incident review concerning property disputes and recent neighborhood events." That was my cue. I stood up, plugged in the flash drive, and began with the basics. Showed the original fence permit approval from the HOA, dated and signed before Karen even moved in. Then came the stills from the wild boars that had sparked the whole thing. Grainy black and white shots of massive beasts ramming into my old wooden fence, followed by a side-by-side image of the reinforced electric one holding steady. I explained the low-voltage system, the legal signage, the safety certifications. Then I played the clip. Karen, in full view, directing a hired handyman with a chainsaw, yelling over the fence line, grabbing the metal bracket bare-handed like she was trying to disarm a bomb, and then, zap. Her body jolted, the chainsaw dropped, she stumbled back and landed right in my koi pond, her wig launching mid-fall and landing with an almost poetic little plop next to a lily pad. The room erupted. Not with laughter, yet. People tried to hold it in, but someone in the back let out a stifled snort. A few chuckles followed, and one guy gasped so dramatically you'd think it was the finale of a true crime documentary. Karen stood up fast, cane wobbling, neck brace tilted like a crooked halo. "I demand to speak," she said, pointing at me like a villain from an old-school courtroom soap. She launched into her version, claimed she'd been trying to make the area safer for children, that she believed the fence was a hazardous electrical anomaly, and that she had been misled by neighborhood misinformation and poorly marked signage. She tried to paint herself as the brave, community-minded hero who had suffered for asking the hard questions. And then, unbelievably, she said she believed I had staged the fence malfunction intentionally to electrocute her. That was it. The dam broke. People laughed, loudly. One woman even had to wipe tears from her eyes. The HOA president raised his hand, trying not to smile, and said, "Thank you, Karen. We'll take that into consideration." But it was over. She'd lost them. She didn't just lose the argument. She lost the room. Then came the kicker. The handyman she'd hired. He had submitted a written statement to the HOA. In it, he said he had no idea the fence was electric, that Karen never mentioned it, and that he felt pressured to cut through something he knew didn't belong to her. That was the nail in the coffin. The HOA board ruled right then and there. Karen was barred from all meetings for a full year. Any future complaints from her would require third-party verification before review. And, perhaps most satisfying of all, she was formally warned that any further impersonation of board members would result in legal action. She sat down, defeated, her cane useless across her lap. The neck brace had slid to one side. Her sunglasses stayed on, but her aura, the one of authority, power, control, it was gone. She wasn't Karen, the unofficial HOA president, anymore. She was just Karen, and everyone saw it. As I walked out of that meeting, neighbors clapped me on the back. Someone slipped Tank a treat. And for the first time in what felt like months, I breathed. Not just a sigh of relief, a real breath. One that reached all the way to the bottom of my lungs. Peace was back. Karen had lost. But karma wasn't finished yet. At 3:07 the next morning, I woke up to a sound I recognized all too well, a loud, splintering crash, followed by frantic barking. I jumped up, looked outside, and what I saw nearly made me drop the mug in my hand. It wasn't my yard this time. It was hers. Karen's pristine, over-decorated, over-landscaped kingdom, under siege. The wild boars had returned. No electric fence to stop them now. No deterrent signs. No auxiliary bounce zone tape. Just open grass, soft soil, and a buffet of delicate flowers and solar-powered flamingos waiting to be destroyed. The flower beds were dug up like a construction site. Her gnomes were scattered like bowling pins. One flamingo had been trampled so completely, its little wire legs were the only thing left standing. And right there in the middle of it all was Karen, robe on, hair a mess, holding a flashlight and yelling incoherently into the night. The boars didn't even flinch. They finished their rampage and casually sauntered off into the woods like they owned the place. She just stood there in the aftermath, robe dragging in the mud, eyes wide with the full realization that she had done this. She had removed the one thing protecting her and invited disaster in with both hands. I didn't say anything. I didn't wave. I didn't gloat. I just watched from behind the curtain, Tank sitting beside me, tail wagging slowly like even he understood the poetry of the moment. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't a plan. This was karma showing up, right on time, with mud on its hooves. And just like that, Karen disappeared. No more meetings, no more decorations, no more flyers, letters, or knock-off legal threats. A moving truck showed up a few days later. Her house was empty within the week. Her poodles barked from behind the closed door one last time. And then, gone. Her empire collapsed, one pink flamingo at a time. She left behind silence and peace, the kind you don't even realize you've been missing until it's finally back.